First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to be here and on the 30th anniversary of fall of Berlin Wall. And I prepared basically my speech about fall of Berlin Wall and what it meant to us in Kosovo. And at that time, as I was a young person, and also what I think should mean the fall of Berlin Wall in future. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, like as we know, on 9th of November 1989, 5 days after 500,000 people gathered in East Berlin in mass protest, the Berlin Wall dividing communist East Germany and West Germany started to crumble. This was a good news for Europe and for the whole world. It was a news that the Iron Curtain was falling and iron strangling the minds and hearts of millions of people under the grip of Soviet Russia was crumbling as well. As a domino effect of the Berlin Wall, the worst communist regimes and dictatorships in Europe were falling one after another. However, former Yugoslavia, as it was one of the most liberal regimes of the East Europe, was turning to authoritarianism and nationalistic ideas of Great Serbia were giving way to neo-fascist regime of Milosevic, which later, as you know, committed one of the most worst crimes in Europe since World War II. This year, in 1989, I was 16 years old, and I remember that under the threat of the tanks and with the curfew of socialist curfew of Yugoslav People's Army, constitutional changes were done in former Yugoslavia, and Kosovo was taken away its autonomy. Taking away little liberties that we had at that time and that Kosovo enjoyed. Milosevic took away the political autonomy of Kosovo as it was a constitutive part of Yugoslav Federation. And at the time when we were seeing celebrations in Berlin, I was also remembering demonstration, tear gas, police violence in the streets of my hometown in Prizren. We were worried for our future as one of the most brutal regimes was being set up in Kosovo with ethnic segregation and economic exploitation. We were at the heart of the Balkans and very near Europe. That's why we were optimistic. As I was listening to conversations of elderly people, people were fired from jobs in the public sector. University of Pristina was closed down. Managers of socially owned factories were replaced by Serbs who were coming from Belgrade. And Kosovo police force fired Albanians who were working in it. In coming years, hundreds of thousands of people were arrested in information interrogations of Serbian police. And I was experiencing troubles as an adolescent in one time seeing all this celebration and listening to U2, and at the same time seeing in TV a guy who was speaking in the tones of rhetoric of Adolf Hitler 50 years after his death. We were worried for the developments that we were experiencing in Kosovo, but we were optimistic while we were observing Europe. That year, my father was fired from job at his position as a director of one factory in Prizren, and he was replaced by a Serb who used to live in Belgrade, and he basically came there, took the materials that they were working in the factory, which was gold and silver, and then put to the vans and raw materials that were used to production of the jewelry had left factory, and thus workers who were doing this handwork jewelry called filigrane were left without jobs. This happened in many other factories where we were hearing stories about machinery being taken away from Kosovo and sent to Serbia. In the following years, more than 200,000 workers who were working in public sector in socially owned factories were left without jobs. However, as we said, we were worried, and one event that was going in Europe was giving us hope. And especially the fall of Berlin Wall, we were sure that while Europe is turning to liberties and human rights, things could not continue in opposite direction in Pristina. Soon the peaceful movement was formed. As schools in Albania were closed, parallel education system was formed as a resistance to Milosevic regime, and I started to go to school organized in private houses. Circumstances were bad, but we were very happy that we could continue education in our own language, and we were sure that these bad days soon will end. As the dividing wall of Berlin was falling. This was not quite soon, actually, and frankly speaking, this soon happened very late. As Milosevic had to organize a propaganda machinery and start to state infrastructure of Yugoslavia he used for his own purposes. For the creation of what he was thinking of Greater Serbia. Then we all know that all the ethnic cleansing that happened in former Yugoslavia, and during this time Kosovo was the first step. However, Milosevic's plans were bigger, including Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina, and other parts of former Yugoslavia. But as we were waiting that these things will not happen, seeing the developments in Europe, we can say that we were both right and wrong. We were right that the situation of repression and ethnic cleansing and war could not continue, but we were wrong how long it would take for the whole world and Europe to act. It took precisely 10 years that we had to wait. War in Slovenia, war in Croatia, war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and war in Kosovo. And to see 100,000 of people die, thousands of women raped, many thousands of villages and houses and many cities destroyed, until we saw a united action against Milosevic and his repressive regime and military machinery. As we were hoping in 1989, this happened in 1999. So 10 years later, and military intervention against Milosevic took time, and we were actually happy that we were right at that time. I had heard a Serbian artist saying that while smart people are in doubt and think, crazy people act without thinking. This happened in former Yugoslavia and with Milosevic, and this happens in many other parts of the world where injustice and violence happens. We in Kosovo say that for good things it takes years and a lot of effort, while for bad things to happen you need just a second. 30 years from fall of Berlin Wall, we as Europe and as a world are much better than we were at that time, both in human rights and liberties. And however, we see that threats are evident and they are waiting in surprise. A decade after the Second World War, Germany and France signed the first treaty, creating a basis for European Union. It took decades for Europe to build its values. Trust and unity and unify the people who were divided by nationalistic ideologies and at the expense of liberties. The European Union was a response to fascism, and it is one of the most successful projects of human history. It provided progress, human rights, liberties, and economic development to Europe, and it paved way for the progress and economic development, and it showed basically that democracy is a predecessor of prosperity and development. Social justice, human rights, and liberties are not possible without democracy, and democracy can pull all the walls and open the way for the future generations. Fall of Berlin Wall was inspiration for us and for our struggle for liberty, and Europe is our inspiration for democracy and development. However, recent developments sometimes prove that tragic histories that can happen again. That for bad things to happen, it takes only seconds, and the work done for long periods can be lost very fast. Today we do not have a Berlin Wall, but many new walls are being built all over the world and also in Europe itself. Instead of walls, we need more roads and better cooperation. Instead of enemies, we need investment in innovation and education of young people. Europe is an example how animosities can be turned to alliances, how cooperation can curb brutality. Thus, Europe must continue to be an example for the world, both for human rights and for liberties, and should not be afraid of its populistic movements that are rising. And thus, try to defend its values. While problems happen fast, as we said, solutions will take time. And we should not be afraid to look for solutions and take risk and to be patient. As in case of climate change and global warming, as one of the topics where Europe leads and should be leading, as it has a historical responsibility as one of the biggest contributors for the emission of carbon dioxide and for the current change in global climate. Europe should take more extensive lead in this and should take the world by example. Humanity has many problems, but unity and openness are solutions and not divisions and claustrophobia. We will be stronger if we fight our phobias with open minds and with experiences and science. Walls never stopped migration from Chinese wall to lead being built in border with Mexico. Walls are only symptoms of our problems. Instead of fighting symptoms, we should fight causes. Instead of fighting victims, we should fight injustice. Fall of Berlin Wall 30 years ago proved that walls cannot hold people and cannot hold ideas. Remembering Berlin Wall, we should all stand against those who want to divide the world and find common ground for dialogue and cooperation. Our biggest problem as humanity is that humanity, all the problems actually that we as a humanity have, from climate change to problems with trade, problems with poverty and everything, do not have borders. So fighting these problems that do not have borders, do not have walls, will not be possible with divisions. Hope that we will unite as Germany was united 30 years ago to change our world and to make it a better place. Thank you.
So we can Sorry to take the floor again. I was just wondering, that was very inspiring, very, very good. Thank you very much. You said Europe should not be afraid of its populistic movements.
Yeah.
How should we fight them, do you think? How should we deal with our populistic movements?
I think people, of course, we should fight with data and with things that we have. I think if Europe has had a big increase in economy after the 1950s, 1960s, it was also due to the labor that came from Balkans, from Turkey, from other countries. And this economic development, I think, which benefited everybody, was also by contribution of migrant workers and by contribution of everybody who participated in the development. So I think that people basically who are who are against Brexit, who are against these movements which are coming more and more, in latest elections, I think should be more vocal and should be more vocal with numbers. Because I think we were, when you look at how Milosevic came to power, it was precisely that many smart people who knew that he was wrong were not talking. And they left him to take the control of army, to take control of government and everything. And once he had all the machinery, the war was inevitable. So I think while we see wrong things happen in our societies, we should be more proactive and stop those things from the beginning, and not to wait to be too late, as it was in former Yugoslavia. I think this is the thing. Again, it is very important to say that European Union is a product that was created or project against fascism, against what happened in Second World War. So we should potentiate that, and we should tell that basically it is one of the successful projects in human history if you look at the progress it made during these years. So and for those who are Eurosceptics, I think this is the best answer to give. Yeah.
We need to conclude, unfortunately, even though only one question, but I'm keeping an eye on the clock. But if we could please all together express our sincere gratitude.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.